What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one I want to break down what's going on with Tesla, SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. I'm going to break down what's happening with the economic calendar thus far, what the news is saying about the market in Tesla, and how you should be looking at the market as we open today, as I give you guys a pre-market update video. But before I bring in the devil's information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed up to 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed up to 15 free stocks, and the offer ends very soon. Now, looking at the market, we're actually seeing the indices very, very close to all-time highs, whereas Tesla's selling off a bit, looking relatively weak once again, and that's amidst the fact that we're getting a lot of bad news for Tesla. Let me first talk about some data and news before I break down the charts. So first and foremost, today is Friday, January 19th, and we have some big data coming out. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say big data, but some data that could affect the markets. At 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Reports. We have the 5-year inflationary expectations, the Michigan Current Conditions Report, and very important things about consumer sentiment. Watch for volatility at 10 o'clock a.m. See how all this data affects the markets. Does it push the market higher? Does the market get a big rejection? Be very careful at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 30 minutes after market open. On top of this, at 1 p.m., we have Barr from the Fed giving a speech, and we have another speech from Daly at 4:15. So we have a couple of speeches from the Fed speakers later on during the day, but the main piece of data is at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Watch that very carefully. Right now, the Dow has jumped 200 points, and the S&P 500 is on the cusp of new highs, once again holding up nicely. That is once again one of some of the things that we were expecting on this channel. As the S&P 500 is approaching the all-time highs, we're going to be watching how it reacts to that tight resistance. Nelson Peltz is making his run at Disney for the board, and he's laying out exactly how he sees things going down. That's a big development for Disney. That's making a lot of headlines. Department store retailer Macy's is cutting about 2,300 jobs, or 3.5% of its workforce. No surprises right now in this current environment. And Meta is stocking up on Nvidia's powerful generative AI enabling computer chips, which is likely going to be a multi-billion-dollar effect. That's once again big news for them. We have the H100 graphics cards becoming high demand right now for AI development. That's making all the headlines right now, and that was bullish news for Nvidia. As far as data goes, we're still waiting for these earnings, but so far I've seen a couple of them which are a little decent, but once again, they're very, very minor, so I'm not going to go into the full details about them. It's not really affecting the market that much. Most of these are very, very minor for the rest of the week, and we're going to be seeing stronger earnings, more significant ones going into next week. For SPY, don't forget we have 2 million calls and about 3.4 million puts expiring, 1.71 puts to call ratio. With all the puts expiring, SPY is holding up very nicely thus far, and we'll have to see if it could hold and sustain these levels. But so far, it's favoring the bulls because the bears are the ones who make up the majority of the positions. Tesla is taking the Cybertruck on a tour of China, but it won't be on sale yet. That's some big news making headlines right now. They're basically taking the Cybertruck around China. It's going to be available in China in the future, but just not yet. So that's so far what Tesla's trying to do. On top of this, there's more headlines coming out about how Cybertruck owners drove Tesla, the Cybertruck, about 10,000 miles, and said that the range is 164 to 206 miles. 206 miles when fully charged, around 180 when it's at 80%. So very, very interesting stuff thus far. This does depend on the terrain, the environment, the speed they're going, and all these other factors. So the ranges are not always going to be perfect. But with that being said, I mean, it's still not a horrible range. And hopefully we continue to see more accurate estimates as time goes on. Nothing too negative thus far, at least from those two articles. But this was more negative as there's news saying that the Arctic cold in the US turns electric car charging stations into Tesla cemeteries because the cold does actually make things a little bit more difficult. This is making a lot of headlines, especially in places like Chicago. If anything, Tesla has to find a way to kind of like affect this and kind of sustain all of this because there are some very, very cold temperatures there, and it's kind of hurting a lot of the Teslas. It makes it much more difficult for them to charge. But this, the same issues also happen to other cars when it's way too cold. So I wouldn't necessarily just call out to Tesla, but this is something that's worth noting. Hopefully, Tesla finds improvements for this, but that's one negative headline. Another negative headline is that there's the news asking if Elon Musk is going to step away from Tesla. They're saying this based off his previous comments about his, uh, you know, ideal voting control amount and other factors like that. Unfortunately, guys, this is not likely everything that's coming out. Elon Musk he has no plans at leaving Tesla, but this is leading to some fear because mainstream headlines are talking about Musk in a very negative light and him potentially even leaving Tesla. But there's no conclusive evidence of that playing out, and he has never said he's going to leave Tesla like right now. So it doesn't make sense to worry too much about that quite yet. Anyways, now let's talk about the charts. How are things looking? Tesla's looking relatively weak. We have a range right here. We have support at 208. We have resistance around 212. There's also some minor resistance in this 210 area. You can see how this is affecting Tesla. If it tries to push up, watch this 210 zone. If it tries to break above the 210s, our next target is this 212 zone, 214 around there. Then we have this imbalance at 216. I know these levels are very tight, guys, but this is what the chart's doing. If we get above the 216s, our next target is going to be close to 220. All right. For support, you're going to be watching 208. If we lose this, it could get very close to 205. If it loses 205, I mean, it's going to basically sink to 202, then eventually 200. But 202 will likely not stop it. I think 200 would come if we lose 205. Those are your levels on Tesla. What do I see it doing? It's just chopping back and forth between supply and demand so far, but it is looking relatively weak compared to the market. It might backtest the 208s and try to rebound a bit and then just continue to trade sideways. So I'm seeing it just trading sideways between these ranges for some time, potentially even dropping lower if we lose 208. Overall, it's still looking relatively weak compared to the market. It's still favoring the bears, this overall trend, and there's no sign of Tesla bouncing just yet. So I just wanted to warn you about that. Might be a boring day for Tesla, not looking the strongest compared to the market, and it's just continuing to just chop around and also downtrend slightly as shown on the 4-hour time frame. Despite that, the 4-hour of SPY looks relatively strong. It's actually holding up very nicely. Tesla's the one that's underperforming relative to these other stocks. SPY is looking pretty good right now because we actually broke above 478 temporarily. We touched 479.5, and now we're retracing back down to 478. So we're going to be watching these levels very carefully. We have support now between 478 and 477.5. If we lose that, I mean, minor support's at 477. I would watch 476.5 after that. If we lose that, it could come all the way down to 475. And if that fails us, our next target is 473.5. All right. If we try to be bullish, you want to see this thing hold above 478. If we hold above 478 and start pushing back up, we do have some minor resistance between 479.5. And then the strong resistance is going to be closer to 480. That's the all-time high of SPY. It's going to be a very tough resistance. So we'll see if we can try to break that. If we break 480, our next target is around 481 and then 482.25. We're going to be watching those levels carefully. Keep in mind 480 is going to be critical for SPY. That's where the all-time high happens to be. Basically, I'm going to make this yellow and try to make this a little bit thicker, but we're going to be watching that very carefully to see how that holds. Now, could SPY push up and try to break out? It sure can, but for now, we're going to be watching to see how it holds 478. It could try to rebound, try to fight for this 479.5 to 480 level again, but the resistance is going to be very tight, so watch it very carefully up there. As far as the QQQ goes, this thing is looking very strong. We have resistance at 416.5. If we break this, our next target, we have some minor resistance at 417, but 418 is going to be stronger resistance. If it breaks 418, our next target is 420. For support, watch 415. If we lose this, we could be looking for a retracement towards 413. Well, the gap filled to 414 and then 413. In my opinion, the QQQ is on a strong uptrend. It could retrace to 415 again and maybe even try to come down to fill this gap at 414. Could retrace just a little bit more by 1 point and then try to bounce. But overall, the trend is still bullish as it's continuing to uptrend. I think that it's going to eventually, it could retrace a bit more and try to bounce. I think it's going to hold up nicely. So far, it's favoring the bulls and it might retest the high from here. So retrace a bit, then retest the high, and we'll see if this breaks. If it does break, look for a bigger push. As far as Nvda goes, Nvidia is still looking decent. Now we have this big gap below to watch for. It's currently around this 580 area, kind of chopping around. If we continue to sink, watch 577. If we lose that, there's a gap to fill down here at 574, where it could bounce after that. If it loses 574, you're going to be looking for a push down to 570. Excuse me. For resistance, you have 580. If we break this, watch 582. Minor resistance there, 584.8 and 587 above that. Nvidia looks like it might actually sink a little bit. It might actually come down towards this wick, maybe even fill the gap and then bounce. So watch that very carefully on Nvidia and watch for volatility at the 580 range. But overall, the trend is still bullish on Nvidia. It is still uptrending like this. You guys can see it's still uptrending very nicely. Could drop and then bounce. Overall, it's still on an uptrend, so it's not looking that bad overall. And we could see it just try to continue to hold around this range. For Aapl, Aapl is still looking very strong as well because Aapl has been on a very strong uptrend like this. We also have a gap to fill on the daily. Let me just show you that real quick before I conclude this video. Aapl has this unfilled gap on the daily around 192. So I could see Aapl. You guys can see this gap is over here. We have this big gap to fill around 192. If Aapl holds above 190, I think it's our next target is 192. If we fail to hold 190, you're going to be watching it retrace to 188. And if 188 fails us, we have the next support 187, which is very minor. 186.5 is more significant. If we lose that, 185 is next. What do I think this is going to do? Well, it's going to retrace a little bit more. We're going to be looking for a back to the 188s. And then I think that it might attempt to either bounce back up to 190, and we'll have to see if that holds. If we do break above 190 and hold above that, we could see 192 by next week, which could push the market higher. If we fail to hold above 190 or close below it, there's a risk of it coming back down to 188. So watch this very carefully. Apple's on a strong uptrend, but you want to be watching your levels just to be safe. Tesla's looking relatively weak, guys. Excuse me. So watch that very carefully on Tesla, and the rest of the stocks out there have bullish potential. So watch it all carefully. I'll see you guys very soon. This is your pre-market update video, and peace out.